Well, a number of years ago, we went on a family holiday to Florida, and as we finally arrived at the hotel, we were exhausted. It was a long day of traveling, and one of the staff members at the hotel very kindly offered to take our bags up to our room. And so as we walked through the front door of our room, we all kind of flopped on the bed, really tired. And the American staff member said to us, "You guys look exhausted, you've had a long day of traveling, I'm sure you're really hungry as well. Do you want me to go and get you some chips?" And we all kind of looked at each other and thought, oh, chips would be unbelievable right now. And I'm kind of picturing putting the salt and vinegar on the chips, maybe a little cheeseburger on the side. And so the staff member goes away and he comes back about 10 minutes later. And to our horror, he hands us a bag of crisps. And we all kind of look at each other and think to ourselves, I thought he said he was going to get us chips, and he's given us crisps. And the little American staff member handed them to us and he said, "Here you go, here are your chips." And we all learned a very valuable lesson that day, which is this, that the same word can mean two very different things dependent upon the culture you belong to. Chips to us meant something very different to chips to them. You could say the same with a whole lot of words. For example, the word football. Football means something differently to you as it does to someone from a different country in the world. The same word can have a very different meaning dependent upon the culture you're a part of. And that's especially true when we think about the word God. Our perception of what God is like or who God is can vary massively depending upon the culture that we come from. Because the truth is, what we all do when we think about God is we think of him as being someone just like us, just kind of pumped up times a million. God is like someone from my culture who we value, who we hold in high esteem, but just bigger. Isn't that what we tend to do when we think about God? That's why it's no coincidence when you look through different cultures and generations that warrior-like cultures view God just as this big warrior in the sky. This tough guy in heaven. Other cultures, for example, who value intellect, say maybe the Greeks who think knowledge is supreme, how do they view God? They viewed him as someone who was just this wise figure in the sky who was all-knowing and sits in heaven stroking his beard. Kind of distant, but very wise. Our culture does the same thing. Our culture is one which values tolerance and affirms everything. And so we kind of view God as just this kind of gentle, timid, passive grandfather in the sky. That's how our culture views God. And so the question is this, with all these different perceptions of what God must be like, how do we really know what God is like? How can we objectively know what God is really like? Because I can't just assume that God is how my culture perceives him to be. Because what's to say that my cultural perception of God is superior to another cultural perception of God? Why, for example, should God be a timid grandfather in the sky as we view him, and not, say, a knowledgeable figure like the Greeks viewed him, or not a warrior-type figure as other cultures have viewed him? How do we objectively know what God is really like? And the answer, of course, is we see how God reveals himself in the Bible. That's why we need the Bible. The Bible is God's revelation to us. In other words, it's God's way of revealing himself to us. And so as we read the unchanging words of the Bible, we discover what God's unchanging nature is really like. That's why the Bible is controversial in every culture. That's why the Bible is controversial in every generation, because every generation and every culture's view of God is in some way rebuked when they read the Bible. For example, those from a warrior-like culture who view God as a warrior in the sky, they're rebuked when they read the Bible because they discover that God isn't just strong and mighty, but he's also gentle and loving. When other cultures, such as knowledge-based cultures, read the Bible, their view of God is rebuked because they discover God isn't just this kind of cold, distant intellect in the sky, but he's also an intimate father. When someone from our culture reads the Bible, we are rebuked in our view of God because we discover that God isn't just this passive, gentle, timid grandfather in the sky. He's also a God of wrath and judgment. And so all our cultural perceptions of what God must be like are all rebuked when we read the pages of Scripture and we see how God actually reveals himself. And so the question all of us need to ask ourselves is this. Is your view of God based upon your culture's perception of what God must be like? Or is your view of God based upon how God reveals himself in his unchanging word, the Bible?